Okay, take two. First take was 40 minutes long, so we're going to hope that take two is a little shorter. So, welcome to Don't Make Me Pull Out My Books. I literally have my books right here. I also have lots of notes today. Lots and lots and lots of notes. Lots of notes. Lots of notes. In fact, I have so many notes that I outlined so that I didn't ramble. Take one showed that I'm not very good at following my outline, but I did outline. In fact, I outlined this more than I've ever outlined a single academic paper in my entire life because I have never outlined an academic paper in my entire life. So that shows you how dedicated I am to this. This episode is going to focus on Watson and is going to focus in particular on two aspects of Watson that we frequently don't see in adaptations and tend to forget in canon. That are very much at the forefront in elementary. Praise God. The first is going to be Watson as sober companion. Yes, I'm going to address that. And the second is going to be Watson as a detective. I am not going to be addressing the argument of Watson as a woman because I think it's bullshit, and furthermore, I think it's sexist and racist bullshit. And if your major argument against elementary is that Watson is a woman or Watson is a Chinese American woman, I think you need to take a long look at what you're doing with your life. I think you need to sit down. I think you need to read some books on sexism. And I think you need to read some books on racism. And then I think you need to sit down again and really think about it. And maybe change some of your life choices. So I'm not going to be really addressing that. However, I did want to just briefly bring up the point, as many others have done and addressed in far more intelligent ways than I will do here, that Watson as a woman is not in fact a new thing, that we have films such as The Return of Sherlock Holmes Returns, They Might Be Giants, in which Watson is a woman. We have My Dearest Holmes, which is a Russian film that you can't get on DVD, and you can only watch on YouTube without subtitles, which is not great for those of us who don't speak Russian. In which they're both women, and then of course there's the book Honor Among Punks, which is a graphic novel in which, again, they're both women. So I'm not going to really address that. However, I am going to point out that Watson as a woman is so old, in fact, that there's a speech given by Rex Stout in 1940, 1941, something like that. And you can find the text online. Just Google search Watson was a woman, Rex Stout, and you'll find it. And wherein Rex Stout gave this speech where he argued that Watson was, in fact, a woman. And it's so crackalicious and so great because literally the entire argument boils down to Watson was a woman because men didn't speak to other men like the way that Watson speaks about Holmes. And, so, therefore, not only was Watson a woman, Watson totally was Holmes's wife. And not only was Watson Holmes's wife, Watson was Irene Adler. So, I mean, in the grand scheme of crackalicious theories, this is so great, and you really need to check it out, because it's, I love that essay. It's great. So yeah, putting that to rest, let's address first Watson as a sober companion. In the show Elementary, the way that Holmes and Watson meet is that Watson is hired on to be the sober companion for Sherlock Holmes, who just got out of rehab for his everything addiction. They haven't really explained exactly what his addiction was. We definitely know heroin. Other things I'm not sure about because I don't pay that much attention, to be honest, because I suck. So yeah, that's how they meet. And there was a lot of outcry when the show was first announced because Watson wasn't going to be a surgeon, and Watson wasn't going to be military. I'm not even going to address the whole military thing because I have a lot of thoughts on that. We're not going to get political here. But Watson as a sober companion was, a lot of people were like, it's so not canon! And it's so wrong! And it's so great that it's so wrong, because now I get to share it with you, which you're just gonna love. I do want to point out that in the stories when we first meet Watson, Watson is not a practicing doctor. Watson is just back from the war. Watson's kind of a train wreck. And Watson doesn't actually go back into active practice until about 7 or so years after he meets Holmes. He doesn't go back into practice until he marries Mary Morstan. So for 7 years of his acquaintance with Holmes, he's nothing more than a friend, a flatmate, and a fellow detective. But the sober companion aspect comes in a couple of ways. I'm not going to pull out all the quotes where Watson is like, fucking Holmes and his fucking drug habit, because you can find those everywhere. There are a lot of stories where Watson very honestly addresses that he doesn't like the fact that Holmes shoots up with a 7% solution of cocaine, and that he occasionally uses morphine, although we really hear more about the cocaine in the stories. But we do have this great reference in the missing 3/4 that I want to share with you all. This says, "Things had indeed been very slow with us, and I had learned to dread such periods of inaction, for I knew by experience that my companion's brain was so abnormally active that it was dangerous to leave it without material upon which to work. For years I had gradually weaned him from that drug mania which had threatened once to check his remarkable career. Now I knew that under ordinary conditions he no longer craved for this artificial stimulus, but I was well aware that the fiend was not dead but sleeping, and I have known that the sleep was a light one and the waking near, when in periods of idleness I have seen the drawn look upon Holmes's ascetic face, and the brooding of his deep-set and inscrutable eyes. Therefore I bless this Mr. Overton, whoever he may be, since he had come with his enigmatic message to break that dangerous calm which brought more peril to my friend than all the storms of his tempestuous life." What I love about this reference is not only the fact that it says right up front that it was Watson who got Holmes off the drugs, silver companion, silver companion, silver companion, but that Watson continued to watch for threats to Holmes's sobriety, and in fact welcomed cases specifically because it would help Holmes not return to drugs. And I also love this passage because it does indicate that drugs were becoming a problem for Holmes, that they were in fact beginning to impede upon his ability to do investigations. So, hello canon, hello elementary, look at that, a marriage of two texts. That's just so perfect. And then later in the story we actually have this reference too. "I was horrified by my first glimpse of Holmes next morning, for he sat by the fire holding his tiny hypodermic syringe. I associated that instrument with the single weakness of his nature, and I feared the worst when I saw it glittering in his hand." So, 2 references in one story about Holmes's drug problem and how it's possibly not that great, that's getting a little out of control, and that Watson is going to do his damnedest to make sure that Holmes doesn't go back that way. Well, okay, so you're saying now, okay, fine, so maybe Watson had a little something to do with Holmes's sobriety, but that doesn't make Watson a sober companion. Well, you would be wrong. Well, I mean, not wrong. I mean, they didn't really have sober companions, to the best of my knowledge, in the Victorian era. But we have this reference in The Man with the Twisted Lip, and in fact, it sparks the entire story. So here's what we have. This woman is a friend of the Watsons, specifically Mrs. Watson, and has come to visit them, and she's a train wreck at the moment. "It seems that it was. She had the surest information that of late he being her husband, when the fit was on him, made use of an opium den in the farthest east of the city. Hitherto his orgies had always been confined to one day, and he had come back, twitching and shattered, in the evening. But now the spell had been upon him 48 hours, and he lay there, doubtless among the dregs of the docks, breathing in the poison or sleeping off the effects. There he was to be found, she was sure of it, at the Bar of Gold in Upper Swandam Lane. But what was she to do? How could she, a young and timid woman, make her way into such a place and pluck her husband out from among the ruffians who surrounded him? There was the case, and of course there was but one way out of it. Might I not escort her to this place? And then, as a second thought, why should she come at all? I was Isa Whitney's medical adviser, and as such I had influence over him. I could manage it better if I were alone. I promised her on my word that I would send him home in a cab within 2 hours if he were indeed at the address which she had given me. And so in 10 minutes I had left my armchair in the cheery sitting room behind me, and was speeding eastward in a hansom on a strange errand." So this is another reference where Watson does something to help a drug addict. So the idea, therefore, of Watson as sober companion is not so strange. Again, true, not technically canon in the sense that Watson's title is not sober companion, but then we didn't have those back then. But Watson did have a lot to do with the sobriety of various people, mostly Holmes. We see that role mostly through Holmes. And in fact, in the Twisted Man story, we also have a moment where Watson runs into Holmes in the opium den and goes, "Please tell me you have not added opium to your drugs. Dude, what the fuck?" So I think that's great that Elementary has drawn upon that, the very few references, little hints that we get, and has expanded upon it. So that's Watson as a sober companion. Watson as a detective has, as far as I know, not gotten a lot of flack because I don't go into the Elementary tag anymore for fear of my blood pressure. But I do want to say that Elementary has done a really great job of restoring Watson to the role of partnership in which canon Watson has always been. We have a lot of adaptation distillation throughout the years in which Watson has slowly become of lesser intelligence, of just being the friend who tags along, of really being dumbed down. I think obviously the most well-known situation of this is Nigel Bruce's Watson from the Basil Rathbone films of the 40s and late 30s, where you just kind of watch and go, "Oh, God. Oh, Watson, honey. You were so much better than that." And trust me, I love Nigel Bruce. He was a lovely man. But holy fuck, I don't know what the fuck they were smoking when they made that Watson. Because Nigel Bruce's Watson is kind of memorialized in Kate Beaton's Jam Watson comics, which is great. If you haven't read the Jam Watson things, go Google search it. It's amazing. But Watson was not, in fact, a stupid bungler, and plenty of people have argued that Watson was a doctor and therefore not stupid. But I think what we also tend to forget in those arguments is that not only was Watson just a very intelligent person to begin with, Watson was very capable of making the same deductive reasoning that Holmes was, or was at least able to follow along. Now, just so you know, these are my notes. The green tabs are all the ones in which Watson did deductive shit. Look at that. Look at all that green. I'm not going to read all of them because then you would get really bored, but I'm going to touch upon a few of them. One of them here is from the Norwood Builder. Familiar as I was with my friend's methods, it was not difficult for me to follow his deductions and to observe the untidiness of attire, the sheaf of legal papers, the watch charm, and the breathing which had prompted them. Our client, however, stared in amazement. So Watson, oopsie, shit, was able to follow along just fine. Where's another one that I want to reference? Yes. 6 Napoleons is a very similar sort of thing. For my own case, I had followed step by step the methods by which he had traced the various windings of this complex case, and though I could not yet perceive the goal which we would reach, I understood clearly that Holmes expected this grotesque criminal to make an attempt upon the 2 remaining busts, one of which, I remembered, was at Chiswick. No doubt the object of our journey was to catch him in the very act, and I could not but admire the cunning with which my friend had inserted a wrong clue in the evening paper, so as to give the fellow the idea that he would continue his scheme with impunity. What's great about that reference, as if you don't know this story particularly well, is that this is after several random things that Holmes has said and done, and everybody else is kind of sitting there going, "Oh, okay, sure, we'll go with it." But Watson is able to follow his deductions and also piece together the various things that Holmes has done throughout the past couple of pages and go, I know what we're doing. Because Watson is not stupid. And Watson can follow along because Watson is a partner in this. And I think another great reference here is in the Greek Interpreter. They've heard the story of what the hell is going on, and now they're trying to figure out really what the backstory is. And this exchange begins with Watson talking. "Well then, we will presume that she had once come on a visit to England, and that this herald had persuaded her to fly with him. That is more probable. Then the brother, for that I fancy must be the relationship, comes over from Greece to interfere. He imprudently puts himself into the power of the young man and his older associate. They seize him and use violence toward him in order to make him sign some papers to make over the girl's fortune, of which he may be trustee, to them. This he refuses to do. In order to negotiate with him, as they have to get an interpreter, and they pitch upon this Mr. Malos, having used some other one before. The girl is not told of the arrival of her brother, and finds it out by merest accident." "Excellent, Watson," cried Holmes. "I really fancy that you are not far from the truth. You see that we hold all the cards, and we have only to fear some sudden act of violence on their part. If they give us time, we must have them." And that is, in fact, what happens. Turns out to be true. That is precisely the backstory. So go Watson for being able to figure that out just from hearing stories, not actually from seeing any evidence himself, but from being able to piece this together from what he hears. The Silver Blaze is really an excellent story in general if you want to see proof that Holmes and Watson were partners and not just Watson following along for the hell of it. And there'll be a couple of references today, but really we're just going to focus on these two for right now. In this passage, Holmes is giving Watson a rundown of what he's been told. One moment, I asked, did the stable boy, when he ran out with the dog, leave the door unlocked behind him? Excellent, Watson, excellent, murmured my companion. The importance of this point struck me so forcibly that I sent a special wire to Dartmoor yesterday to clear the matter up. The boy locked the door before he left it. The window, I may add, was not large enough for a man to get through. So, just from hearing a story, Watson was able to seize upon a particularly important point, a point so important, in fact, that Holmes himself sent a telegram to try and figure out the truth behind it. Later on, is it not possible, I suggested, that the incised wound upon Straker may have been caused by his own knife in the convulsive struggles which follow any brain injury? It is more than possible, it is probable, said Holmes. In that case, one of the main points in favor of the accused disappears. So, again, just another instance of Watson being awesome. We have a couple of times throughout the stories where Holmes trusts Watson to be able to follow along with him, and it's kind of summed up in the phrase, you know my methods, Watson. And from, I think, my notes, I think I'll be able to find it. It really appears about 3 times. We have it in The Crooked Man, where literally it's just, you know my methods, Watson. So, yay that. We have it again in, what story is this? Devil's Foot. Knowing my methods as you do, you were, of course, conscious of the somewhat clumsy water pot expedient by which I obtained a clearer impression of his foot than we might otherwise have achieved. And then, where's my other one? The other one's in my other pile of notes. We have, you know my methods said in Blue Carbuncle. Here is my lens. You know my methods. What can you gather yourself as to the individuality of the man who has worn this article? So Holmes trusts that Watson knows how to do the trick. More instances of Watson not being a dumbass in The Red Circle. Dear me, Watson, said Holmes, staring with great curiosity at the slips of foolscap which the landlady had handed to him. This is certainly a little unusual. Seclusion I can understand, but why print? Printing is a clumsy process. Why not write? What would it suggest, Watson? That he desired to conceal his handwriting. Which is correct. Later on, I have a lot of notes, guys. This is how canon this is. This is how canon Watson not being a stupid head is. Oh, this one is great because this is where Holmes basically only will accept it as true if Watson agrees. This is in The Three Gables, which I don't recommend you ever read because it is racist as fuck. I mean, Jesus Christ. You just sit there going... But other than that, we have, no, as I read it, there is something which you do not know that you have, and which you would not give up if you did know. That is how I read it, said I. Dr. Watson agrees, so that settles it. And then a little later on, all the better. During this long period, no one wants anything from you. Now suddenly, within 3 or 4 days, you have urgent demands. What would you gather from that? It can only mean, said I, that the object, whatever it may be, has only just come into the house. Settled once again, said Holmes. What's this story? This is a great little reference because it shows that Watson is growing in his ability to follow along with Holmes and specifically do his own references. It's in The Three Ghirardells. They just read an article in a newspaper, an advertisement. I saw that the word plow was misspelled. Oh, you did notice that, did you? Come, Watson, you improve all the time. Yes, it was bad English, but good American. The printer had it set up as received. Then the buckboards, that is American also, and artesian wells are commoner with them than with us. It was a typical American advertisement, but purporting to be from an English firm. What do you make of that? I can only suppose that this American lawyer put it in himself. So go Watson. Lots of deductive reasoning going on here. The ability of Watson to keep up should no longer be in doubt, because I only read a good half of all my references. Now we're going to look at, I don't know what we're going to look at because I dropped my notes. Hold on. Here's a hint, guys. If you're going to outline stuff, don't drop your outline on the floor. Instances in which Holmes wanted Watson to come with him, or, as we would call it, Watson is very much an equal part of this agency. Because it's ridiculous to presume that Watson was just there to be a biographer. No, Holmes wanted Watson to join him on his cases. We have, in the Priory School, they're out on a case, they're out in the fields doing some detective work, and they need to get some information back to their people at the home base. And they're trying to figure out how to do this. And Watson says, I could take a note back. And Holmes replies, but I need your company and assistance. So, yay, he keeps him along for the ride in Charles Augustus Milverton, which we'll be getting in elementary in like 2 weeks? 3? Well, okay, I don't know how, in terms of hiatuses, I don't know how long it's going to be, but it's like in the next 2 or 3 episodes. Milverton comes in and he says, this gentleman, said he, with a wave in my direction, is it discreet? Is it right? Dr. Watson is my friend and partner. Holmes refers to Watson as partner, not just, my biographer, not just my tag-along, but my partner. Silver Blaze, again, just a really great story if you want to see the partnership between Holmes and Watson. I should be most happy to go down with you if I should not be in your way, said I. My dear Watson, you would confer a great favor upon me by coming. In Stockbroker's Clerk, where Holmes shows up at Watson's house, basically to be like, come play with me, I miss you, play. And I hope also, he continued, sitting down in the rocking chair, that the cares of medical practice have not entirely obliterated the interest which you used to take in our little deductive problems. On the contrary, I answered, it was only last night that I was looking over my old notes and classifying some of our past results. I trust that you don't consider your collection closed. Not at all. I should wish nothing better than to have some more of such experiences. So, from the past two quotes, I think it should be noted that not only does Holmes want Watson to come along, but Watson is eager to go. Watson loves this shit. And Holmes wants him to come and play. And there's this great gift set on Tumblr from Possibility 2, where it really emphasized the number of times that Holmes and Watson referred to our cases, our problems, blah 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 blah. And that's also very canon because it's from the stories. Holmes very rarely refers to, my cases, my work. He often says our cases, our problems, our work. And that's so great. He's so happy. Other instances. Here we go. From the illustrious client. I am bound, therefore, to hope that it is not a false scent and that he has some real need for our assistance. Our? Well, if you would be so good, Watson. I shall be honored. So, literally just was referencing the whole concept of our, and there it is again in the text that Holmes refers to it, to all these things, as the combination of their work. Watson is a partner. Watson is part of this agency, and I can think of really no better reference in that than the Sussex Vampire, where literally we have actually the word agency showing up. You are right, Watson. It mentions the legend in one of these references. But are we to give serious attention to such things? This agency stands flat-footed upon the ground, and there it must remain. The world is big enough for us. No ghosts need apply. Our agency. There's another reference in another story about this agency, the detective agency, being, Holmes and Watson together. And I don't have it here because I spent 3 hours putting these notes together. I really didn't want to do more work. But that's just one of the references in which they're referred to as an agency. And then in the same story, Sussex Vampire, we have, of course we could come. There is a lull at present. I can give you my undivided energies. Watson, of course, comes with us. And then later on, Creeping Man. Have no fear, Mr. Bennet. Dr. Watson is the very soul of discretion, and I can assure you that this is a matter in which I am very likely to need an assistant. Holmes is always wanting Watson to come along, because Watson is his partner. Watson contributes to the case. Watson, in fact, in several instances provides a number of clues, and often does things that Holmes cannot. I think one of my favorite references is, again, in Silver Blaze, where we have here, they're walking along, they're following some tracks. The double track turned sharp off and took the direction of King's Highland. Holmes whistled, and we both followed along after it. His eyes were on the trail, but I happened to look a little to one side, and saw to my surprise the same tracks coming back again in the opposite direction. "One for you, Watson," said Holmes when I pointed it out. "You have saved us a long walk, which would have brought us back on our own traces. Let us follow the return track." There's a couple of other instances of this. In Charles Augustus Milverton, when they break into Milverton's room at night, Watson is the one who notices that the back door is unlocked and thinks that's weird. And when he points it out to Holmes, Holmes is like, "Okay, yeah, that's okay, that's weird," and in fact proves to be an invaluable clue later on. Other clues that are given are when Holmes sends Watson to do his work for him. And I think that's important to look at because there's really 5 stories that look at Watson as an independent agent. We have The Solitary Cyclist, A Mysterious Client, The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax, Retired Colorman, and, of course, Hound of the fucking Baskervilles. In all of these stories, Holmes sends Watson off because he's busy or he doesn't quite want to go just yet, or, other reasons why, to do the work for him and to bring back reports. And in pretty much all of these stories, poor Watson. Watson comes back, gives the report, and then Holmes proceeds to say, "You dumbass, you fucked it all up, what the hell?" But in every single one of these stories, even after Holmes says, "You dumbass, you fucked it all up, what the hell?" Watson has provided a pretty important clue. In Solitary Cyclist, in fact, after while giving his report, Watson says, or at least records, his hands were raised and he seemed to be settling his necktie about the guy that he's watching. And it's really just a passing reference. And as a reader, you don't really think anything about it other than, okay, sure, random detail, go for it. Holmes proceeds to, just yell and scream. Well, I mean, not literally, but, says in a very polite way, "You really screwed it up, you dumbass." And Watson feels really awful. And, as a reader, you're sitting there going, "Holmes, you dickhead, why did you send him if you're just going to yell at him?" But then later on, we have this quote. Holmes rose and tossed the end of his cigarette into the grate. "I have been very obtuse, Watson," said he. "When in your report you said that you had seen the cyclist as you thought arrange his necktie in the shrubbery, that alone should have told me all." In other words, Watson finds a vital clue. Holmes ignores it, doesn't think anything of it, and it turns out that if he had paid attention to it, the mystery would have been solved a whole hell of a lot sooner. And that's not the first time. That's really not the first time. In Retired Colorman, he, even though Watson, bungles things, i.e. does things the way regular intelligent people would do who aren't Holmes, he does find several vital clues, and thank God, at the end, Holmes at least recognizes it. In his summation, he says this. "This was our first clue," said Holmes. "You can thank Dr. Watson's observation for that, though he failed to draw the inference. It set my foot upon the trail. Why should this man, at such a time, be filling his house with strong odors? Obviously, to cover some other smell which he wished to conceal. Some guilty smell, which would suggest suspicions. Then came the idea of a room such as you see here with iron door and shutter, a hermetically sealed room. Put those two facts together, and whither do they lead? I could only determine that by examining the house myself. I was already certain that the case was serious, for I had examined the box office chart at the Haymarket Theatre, another of Dr. Watson's bullseyes, and ascertained that neither B30 nor 32 of the upper circle had been occupied that night. Therefore, Amberley had not been to the theatre, and his alibi fell to the ground. He made a bad slip when he allowed my astute friend to notice the number of the seat taken for his wife." So, thank you, Holmes, for finally being like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have yelled at him so much. Oops. And then we have Hound of the Baskervilles, which, if you've read the story, and I confess I haven't reread it for note-taking yet, so this is kind of just like 5 minutes skimming. If you've read the story or you're familiar with the story, you know that actually a majority of the story is taken from Watson's reports to Holmes and Watson's diary, because Holmes is busy in London, or so he says, and he can't go himself, so he sends Watson because he figures Watson will be just as good. Well, then Watson discovers that Holmes has actually been on the moor the entire time, and he's really fucking pissed, because he's like, Jesus fucking Christ, man, did you just send me to humiliate me? Am I really that much of a joke to you? We have here, from my literal book, because I don't have notes on this yet. Then my reports have all been wasted. My voice trembled as I recalled the pains and the pride with which I had composed them. Holmes took a bundle of papers from his pocket. Here are your reports, my dear fellow, and very well thumbed, I assure you. I made excellent arrangements, and they are only delayed 1 day upon their way. I must compliment you exceedingly upon the zeal and the intelligence which you have shown over an extraordinarily difficult case. In other words, yeah, okay, so Holmes was there the entire time, but that doesn't mean that Watson's work went to waste. It doesn't mean that Watson did a bad job. It was just that he needed to be there too to do a separate investigation without everybody knowing he was there. So what this all adds up to, when we look at Holmes being able to do deductive reasoning, perhaps not as well as Holmes, but well enough to get by, which frankly I beg all of you to try and do it yourself and realize how really hard it is to do, and then realize that Watson's pretty damn intelligent for being able to go, yes, I see your point. And then we have the fact that Holmes frequently asks for Watson to come along, will show up at his door and be like, come play, come play, come play. I mean, frankly, dude, guys, remember the famous quote, come at once if convenient, if inconvenient, come all the same. He says that in The Creeping Man. He wants Watson with him, and he can't just want him to be a biographer, because he has, at this point, forbidden Watson to write stories. Watson only writes stories during 2 times. When he thinks Holmes is dead, and when Holmes is retired. So he wasn't just bringing him along to increase his fame. He abhorred attention. He really hated that. He gave all of his credit to the police and whoever else was working there. So it couldn't have just been to glorify him that he brought Watson along. And then we also see that Holmes sends Watson in several instances to do detective work for him because he has to be elsewhere. And he trusts him. Watson couldn't have been a dumbass. Watson had to have been able to be a detective. And, in fact, the most damning evidence of all of Watson as a detective sorry, I should have brought water occurs, first of all, in the study of Scarlet, before Watson knows anything about Holmes being a detective. Because when they meet, it isn't just Holmes that fascinates Watson. I mean, it's the concept of Holmes that fascinates him. And specifically, it's the mystery of Holmes that fascinates him. And it says, notes. This packet, by the way, is 63 pages long. Yay. He says right there in the story, this is an exchange between Watson and Stamford. My companion smiled an enigmatical smile. That's just his little peculiarity, he said. A good many people have wanted to know how he finds things out. Oh, a mystery, is it? I cried, rubbing my hands. This is very piquant. I am much obliged to you for bringing us together. The proper study of mankind is man, you know. You must study him, then, Stamford said as he bade me goodbye. You'll find him a knotty problem, though. I'll wager he learns more about you than you about him. Goodbye. Goodbye, I answered, and strolled on to my hotel, considerably interested in my new acquaintance. He's interested in the mystery. He's intrigued by trying to find out what no one else has been able to figure out about Sherlock Holmes. This is what attracts Watson, the thrill of a mystery. And in fact, later on, again, before he knows anything about the concept of deductive reasoning and how Holmes applies it, we have this passage. I pondered over our short conversation, however, and endeavored to draw my deductions from it. He said he would acquire no knowledge which did not bear upon his subject. Therefore, all the knowledge which he possessed was such as would be useful to him. I enumerated in my own mind all the various points upon which he had shown me that he was exceptionally well informed, and then follows, the very famous list, which I hope if you're a Holmes fan you're familiar with. If not, Google it. So that's before he knows Holmes is a detective, and he's able to draw his own inferences and his own. And yes, can he solve the fact that Holmes is a consulting detective? No, frankly, who could? We've never heard of this profession before. Holmes says he's the only one who's the first. So it's really not surprising that Watson couldn't figure out that. But he pursues that mystery. He's fascinated by the mystery. He loves the mystery. That's what's so great about Watson as a detective. But then I think possibly the most damning thing of all is that, spoiler alert, if you aren't familiar with the stories of several hundred years, during the empty house, during the period in which Watson still thinks Holmes is, dead, we see that Watson is not just a detective when Holmes is around. It can be imagined that my close intimacy with Sherlock Holmes had interested me deeply in crime, and that after his disappearance I never failed to read with care the various problems which came before the public. And I even attempted, more than once, for my own private satisfaction, to employ his methods in their solution, though with indifferent success. So, Watson continues to be a detective even after Holmes is dead and gone, because he's learned so much from Holmes, why not? And he still loves the concept of mystery. Again, here we have evidence. God bless Watson. Ronald Adair gets shot in the head and is killed. And we have this. As I read the evidence at the inquest, he went to the inquest, guys, which led up to a verdict of willful murder against some person or persons unknown. I realized more clearly than I had ever done the loss which the community had sustained by the death of Sherlock Holmes. There are points about this strange business which would, I was sure, have specially appealed to him, and the efforts of the police would have been supplemented, or more probably anticipated, by the trained observation and the alert mind of the first criminal agent in Europe. All day, as I drove upon my round, I turned over the case in my mind and found no explanation which appeared to me to be adequate. Okay, so Watson's thinking about this Ronald Adair dude and trying to figure out who killed him and why. He can't figure anything else, but he doesn't stop there, because Watson is a fucking detective and kicks fucking ass. And he goes on to do this. A group of loafers upon the pavement, all staring up at a particular window, directed me to the house which I had come to see. In other words, Watson just went to go to the crime scene to try and figure things out himself. A tall, thin man with colored glasses, whom I strongly suspected of being a plainclothes detective — Watson's able to spot plainclothes detectives now — was pointing out some theory of his own, while the others crowded round to listen to what he said. I got as near to him as I could, but his observations seemed to me to be absurd, so I withdrew again in some disgust. In other words, Watson is like, you have dumbass theories. I'm not listening to this bullshit. And then continuing on, my observations of number 427 Park Lane did little to clear up the problem in which I was interested. The house was separated from the street by a low wall and railing, the whole not more than 5 feet high. It was perfectly easy, therefore, for anyone to get into the garden, but the window was entirely inaccessible, since there was no water pipe or anything which could help the most active man to climb it. More puzzled than ever, I retraced my steps to Kensington. So Watson works as a detective. Watson makes his own deductions and his own conclusions, and does this all by himself. Watson is a detective. He's not just a vital part of the agency, although he is, of course, that. Watson is just as much of a detective as Holmes. Possibly not as good. I mean, you never really know. If you play the game, which is to say that you pretend that the Sherlock Holmes stories are real and not just, fiction written by Arthur Conan Doyle, but are in fact written by Watson, as I do, then you have to begin to wonder if Watson wasn't just, hiding some things to try and make Sherlock Holmes look better, in which Sherlock Holmes himself says several times, I'm not as good as the stories make me out to be. Watson has made me out to be something I'm not. And at one point says that Watson was hiding his own talents behind his own words. But to put it precisely, Watson was important. Watson was a detective. And so, therefore, Lucy Liu's Watson as a detective and as a partner of the agency is very, very, very canon. I think my favorite, in the end, quote about Watson and Watson's role is from not a very good story. It's from the Mazarin Stone, but it's an important quote. If I can find it, where did it go? Ah, here it is. Holmes gives Watson some order, and Watson hesitates for a moment. And Holmes says this: "Yes, you can, Watson, and you will, for you have never failed to play the game. I am sure you will play it to the end." Watson is a partner. Watson is a detective. Watson will never fail to play the game. Because it's just as important to Watson, as we've seen through his various, oh yes, I want to come, and oh look, I'm going to be a detective even when Holmes is gone. Oh look, I'm kind of a detective before I know that Holmes is a detective. We see that this is important to Watson. And so Elementary, focusing on Watson as a detective, as a sober companion, furthermore, to go back, 30 minutes or so, is very, very canon. What Elementary is doing is it's not replicating the stories. It's replicating the concept of the characters and what the characters would have done in a modern world. These bare bones that we've kind of lost over the years through various adaptations and through cultural mass understanding. I don't know where I was going with that. Should have outlined that as well. But they've been lost over the years, and Elementary is returning to that. It's returning to canon in such a way that the reason I think so many people go, it's not canon, is because it's returning to canon in such a way that we haven't seen in so long, or in some cases never seen at all, that it kind of baffles us, because we're looking at, really, a return to the original. And it's a return to the original in a modern setting, and that's odd and it's baffling, but it's very, very real. By not dumbing down Watson, by having Watson call Holmes out on his bullshit, which he does several times, by the way. That's not the focus of this episode. By having Watson be concerned about Holmes's drug habit and be there for Holmes, this is part of canon. This is so part of canon that it's not. It's in the framework, not the words itself, but the very structure of the stories, and that's what makes it so canon in this regard. Okay, looking at this video, it's actually gone on for 42 minutes rather than 40, so we're going to end it here. I really hope that you had, tea or wine or something to get you through this, but if you have watched to the end, congrats to you, gold star, and I'm sorry that my outline didn't make this any shorter. Next one will be shorter, I almost promise. So yeah, thanks for watching, what is this, third episode? Second, depending on how you count it, second episode of Don't Make Me Pull Out My Books, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Peace out.